Welcome back to As the Rabbit Descends Down the Hole. Oh, it's gonna get interesting today, let me tell you. I hope you've been enjoying this, and we came out of talking about Moses, and went in a little bit different direction than you probably are typically used to. Well, we're gonna tackle Joshua now, and we're gonna look at him a little bit different. Joshua, the book of Joshua is it's more interesting than I think people realize. But what we're going to tackle, just the angle, is he's the establisher. He has to take this concept, this Western civilization concept, and implement it. And the first thing he needs to do is he needs a place for people to live, and how they, and where they're going to go, and things like this. And that's a lot harder than you think, especially when there's giants in the land. Oh my gosh, what is he talking about? He's just going off on the deep end. Wait. The Bible does talk about giants. And we're not just talking about the book of Enoch, which is borderline canonized book. The Bible itself talks about this. The historians talk about giants. I mean, this is not something that's just, fairy tale, things like this. Now, some people do embellish, some people do go a little bit overboard with it, but let's just stick down to, that middle ground area, and I think you'll find it quite interesting. Because, you think about this. Giants are mentioned throughout the Bible, and not only are they mentioned throughout the Bible, they're mentioned just in historical references and things like this. The term Nephilim. So this is where it comes from. That's where it came from. Is these hybrids, these things, these hybrid things of angels and man, and the angels descended. They rebelled against God. They descended and they took possession by having intercourse with the daughters of men, is the term that's used, and produce these giant beings, 15-foot beings, also strong, things like this, with knowledge. The knowledge part is quite interesting, because you gotta wonder, about the Bronze Age and Iron Age and things like that. You have to wonder who came up with the idea of breaking rocks up into small pieces and then heating them up. I'm just saying. Who thought of that piece? And then heating them up to extreme temperatures. You got me right. Anyway, but you also look at the structures. Today we cannot figure out how some of these things were built. With our equipment today, they cannot do some of these structures. These rocks, these bases, these monoliths and things like that. These things are massive. Massive. Our biggest trucks can't haul these things. How did they do it? Ropes and pulleys? Yeah, I'm sure they used ropes and pulleys, but you have to have some really strong guys. So you had this, and there was wars all the time and things like this. This is why this is why the flood came, right? And that's kind of what we're getting at here with these giants. So let's kind of go through a little timeline here with these giants. So they're here. They're building things, even afterwards, after the flood. They're still there, and we're going to get to that. But there's a lot of war, there's a lot of chaos. It's like they are, we're going to kill God's creation. We hate the fact that this planet was given to man, and we want control of it. That's essentially what's going on. So, God sends a flood. Noah listens. Noah isn't like the greatest guy in the world as far as, he's got some alcohol issues, he's got some anger issues, things like this. That's just what we know about. But he listened. And that's the key. He listened to God. And his generation was clean. There was none of these things in there. So this means that when they go to reproduce, everything should be fine, and we don't have these problems again. But that's in theory. Lo and behold, what happens? What happens after the flood? So, they come out, and I'm sure they're traumatized, You hear this, seeing the nakedness of the Father. And you think, well, wait a minute. So they just saw their dad naked, and all of a sudden his promise came back? Wait. Nakedness of the Father, what does that mean? What happened? And Moses addresses us much later on of what that actually meant. It was an adulterous affair. In other words, one of Noah's sons, Ham, had a sexual relationship with his mom. What? I know. Canaan. It says, cursed be Canaan. Who's Canaan? Canaan hasn't been born yet. Cursed be Canaan. Right? He will be a servant among servants, and it's like, what? And you think about it, giants kind of were a servant of servants, to a degree. If that's what they were doing, help build these huge structures and stuff, they were a servant. They were building these things. But they were also kind of controlled them a little bit as far as being able to war. They were the ones they sent out. I'm thinking that's how they got back in. That's my thought. That's how they got back in. Or they got back in through the wives. Through Noah's sons' wives. Maybe there was something with them. The obvious is that one, but it's plausible it could be through one of the wives, and this DNA was active in them. It's very plausible. We don't know for sure. We're just throwing out some ideas. Hey, throw spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but what you do is you explore ideas and you see what, because it's interesting. Let's make the Bible interesting. Let's go down these holes, these rabbit holes and whatnot, and see what comes out. And ask questions. There's nothing wrong with questioning God. The whole point of the book is to question God, to have these conversations. This concept of you don't question God. Well, actually you do to learn more, because God wants to have that conversation with you. People question Jesus all the time. If they question him all the time, that's you could tell it irritated him after a while. You could tell he would get worn down. I need to separate myself, and he would just go off by himself for a little while. Never does it say that you can't do it, though. Okay, so in any case, giants are back in there. They're not as dominant as they once were, though. Right? There's not as many of them, but there's a lot of them around. They're kind of strategizing in certain areas. Well, this is where God sends him, and I think this is a big part of why that area was picked. More than just the whole Abraham covenant thing, this area was picked, because God needed to get rid of these things. We need to get rid of this. He said, we're not going to do a flood again, but we need to get rid of these things. These things are dangerous. So he sends them in there, in the battle. They were among grasshoppers among the sites, and this stuff, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. These were some wild bunches, whole Baal worship stuff and all that, blah blah blah. I believe Malachi was one of the beings and whatnot. There was some really crazy stuff. Child sacrifice. There was all sorts of things, and the child sacrifice stuff was really wild. They would heat up these bronze or gold laid calves, whichever little sect it was. Right, they would heat it up to these extreme temperatures, and they would set the kid on it. It was like to literally melt the chow because they heat it up to these insane temperatures. It was like just the most ridiculous thing. And I mean, like, I'm not a fan of like gory movie stuff, but this is like just 10 times. And you think about it, this is what they were doing. This was like a thing. And that stuff was going on all over the world. It was just really drastic, But it's like, wow, all right? So you have this. Joshua's job to get that promised land going and get the trade routes because they control the trade routes. Jericho is very strategic because of where it's located. It was the trade route between basically Europe and Asia. I mean, it was like this huge line, and all roads led to Jericho. All roads led to Rome. At the time, all those roads led to Jericho. And some of these other cities as well. The Gaza was known for as a port city and things like that. But there was a lot of stuff going on, and your job, Joshua, is to get rid of these things. It's pretty my task. You think about it, and you can understand why that generation had to. God couldn't do anything with the generation that was in. They had to wait till the next generation. Because the one that was meant to go in there didn't have the gall to do it. Think about it. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it, but think about it. That's what happens. And it's like, even today we have issues with generations. My generation has issues with the boomer generation because we feel like they pull the ladder up on people. Your college costs $3,500 for 4 years. Ours costs $3,500 a semester. I mean, how is that? And you're saying, oh, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. And most of the jobs are no good, stuff like that. You guys were able to get in on stuff earlier, and then you change the rules. And that's what upsets a lot of people in my generation. But that's besides the point. All right, and the new generation kind of feels the same way. They pulled the ladder up, like and like I said, I'm not going to get into all that, but that's why. But the point is this. This is a pretty hefty task that's set to Joshua. Be strong, be of good courage. Do not fear. Could you do that? Do you have the ability to do that? Do you have the strength to do that? Well, I hope you do. And that's a good lesson to learn. You're up against giants, and you have to clear the land, and you have to, you're taking on these God-like beings who worship another God. They don't worship your God. Do you have the strength and the fortitude to take them on? Tear them down? I mean, those are some lessons to learn here. And it's not just like in a spiritual sense. I mean, this was like practical everyday stuff. They needed for commerce. They needed for not just for living, but for for their market, so they could start a marketplace and things of this nature. The things that you need to do every day to live, your food, your agriculture, you need farming land, all this stuff. We need to wipe out this God, whatever this thing is. We need to wipe these things out so that we can possess it. And you might say, oh, well, who are you to say this? And who are you to, do that? Wait a minute. Whose God is God? Is it this one over here that, perverting things, doing weird things? I personally think they were doing cross-species stuff too. I don't know. Can't prove it. Like I said, I can't prove it. I personally think there was cross-species stuff going on there too with them, But, just take a minute. Just think about it. So, I hope you guys saw out of this. I know we went down a different path with it. Looking at Joshua as more of the book of war, book against giants, taking them down, But, maybe you can take down the giants in your life. All right. I'll see you in the next one. See you soon.